Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you haven't been here before, I'm Jamie B. I read a ton of books. And this is one of those payoff videos where I get to talk about my top 10 out of the first 100 books that I have finished in 2026. Because I turned over my 100th book yesterday. So let's get started. See which books rose to the top from all the books I finished so far this year. Here is a preview of all 10 books that I'm going to be talking about in this video. I've had some amazing books so far this year. These are not all of the 5-star books from what I've finished so far. These are just the ones that are the top of the top. And I've been pretty picky on Storygraph with my rankings. Now that I have the 4.75 option, there are a lot of books that are almost 5 stars, and on Goodreads with their strict 5-star system, they're 5 stars, fine. But they're not quite. So on Storygraph, now that that's my primary platform of record, I can rank them 4.75. So for videos like this, it's really obvious that those are not quite the top. But there were still some that when I was going through, yeah, they were 5 stars when I finished them. They hit great when I finished the book. And by now, yeah, I kind of remember the book, but it really just didn't stick. And there are other ones. There's one in particular that's on this screen now, and we'll get to it in more detail when we get to the individual books. But there's one that it was 4.75 stars when I rated it at the time. And it's kind of stuck with me since, and I've chatted about it with other people, which might give you some clues because it's one that people are talking about. So yeah, you might be able to guess from that. But yeah, it's grown on me, and it was already a 4.75 anyway. So there's really only one more tier to go up, and that's to the 5-star. Another fantasy so let's move on to the individual books and see if any of these need to be on your TBR. If you have read any of these, be sure to tell me in the comments what you thought of these books. All right, first up, we have one of the covers that was the biggest on my overview, because I did kind of size rank them, like which ones are my favorites. This one's my favorite. I'm catching up in this 44 Scotland Street series by Alexander McCall Smith because I got the arc for the new one in the series and I'm behind. So now I have to finish the series up to the new one so that I'm not spoiling myself. These are a sequential story, so you do want to read the majority of Alexander McCall Smith's series in order. These are not ones where you're going to get as much out of them if you just dive in the middle. This is like, if you've been following the prize lists, there was all this discussion about whether Elizabeth Strout's book, Tell Me Everything, was a good choice for the Women's Prize long list last year, because it's one of those that's in a series like this where if you dive in a later book, the story itself will make sense, but there's not as much character building per book because that's done in the whole story arc of the series. You're going to be missing something if you just dive in the middle. And that's definitely the case for this series. 44 Scotland Street starts off in the very early part of the series with all of the main characters, and they're in their nascent states. And they all develop a lot through the course of this series. So by this point, poor Bertie. Bertie's mother is really overbearing. Like, she's decided when her baby Bertie was in gestation that he was the genius child that was, the best genius child ever. And she follows uh, a philosophy of child rearing that's rather extreme and um, very restrictive for poor Bertie. He's had saxophone lessons since he was 3. He's been studying Italian since he was about 3. Anything and everything she can come up with to further his advanced development as soon as possible, he is being crammed into. And she doesn't believe in gender pigeonholing, basically. So he's been forced to wear pink dungarees since he was a small child to school. He doesn't have jeans because that's common. And the poor kid. There's one book in this series where he tried to trade his sad dungarees for some jeans that his friend was willing to give him, basically. And he had to give them back. They're too common. So in this one, I'm not going to give away most of the plot here because, oh my gosh, you need to read the series. It's hilarious. But for hilarious reasons, his mother is absent for the majority of this book. And all of a sudden, Bertie gets to be free to be a little boy and do what he wants to do as a little boy. And his grandma shows up, and she's, from the reader's perspective, probably a great and positive influence on this poor kid. But everything that his mother is not. So, and she does have problems. She does have a bit of a drinking habit that may be a drinking problem. So it's not like she's perfect. There's always multiple sides to these stories. None of the characters are so good or bad. They all have nuance to them. I love that about this series in particular. So yeah, some of them are such caricatures, but they're not so stereotyped that you don't recognize people in your own life that are like these people. So I love the series. Oh my gosh. If you haven't read it yet, you really need to. The first book is 44 Scotland Street. And they go pretty quickly. It will not take me very long to catch up in this series. And they're so much fun. All right, the next one, if you hadn't guessed from the all-in-one shot, this is the one that I bumped up to a 5-star. I actually did this one as an audiobook. Getting access to the International Booker nominees is always hard for me before the shortlist is announced, because they tend to be books that may or may not be available in the United States that early. And eventually they show up. I'm not in a college town, so the books that kind of automatically show up at the library, we have a good variety, and we have a lot of cerebral literary fiction and stuff. So it could be a lot worse. Our library actually won awards, and it's an amazing library system. Not what I would have expected for our city. It's really good, but it still has to cater to the tastes of the community that it serves. And we're not a college town, so there's a bit less of the books in translation that you kind of have to be in the know to even know they exist. And a lot of the International Booker books are that kind of book. when I was a college student in Boulder. Yeah, totally. People in Boulder know more of the books that show up on the International Booker, and they show up in the library, and people read them, and you meet people in coffee shops, and they've read them, and you can have conversations in the wild on those books. Where I live now, maybe not. At least not the year that the long list is being posted. Eventually they get to us and we do read them. Just, yeah, it takes a while. They trickle down. So, Taiwan Travelogue by Shuang-Zi has not quite trickled down to where it's easy to get here. I think our library has a copy and it keeps getting checked out. So it did show up though as streaming audio, and I caught it when it was available. And that's one where when it pops up, like I don't care what I'm in the middle of, it's available. I'm checking it out. Because otherwise it's not going to be available by the time I finish what I'm currently reading, which in this case is A Court of Mist and Fury, which is kind of long. So I put it aside and I finished Taiwan Travelogue. It was really good. This book I've talked about in my last wrap-up video. So if you've been watching my videos for a while, you've seen me talk about this video or this book. This is a story about a woman from Nagasaki who travels to Taiwan, the colony of Taiwan, in 1938 to spend a year traveling around Taiwan, trying all the food and exploring and seeing the real Taiwan for basically the equivalent of a travel blog, but in the periodicals that were available in Japan in the 1930s. So she meets up with a local Taiwanese woman, and they travel around and do her itinerary. And this local woman is really good at anticipating what this travel writer would want. She's had a horrible time before finding this assistant, just getting anyone local to actually show her something that's not stylized for tourists. And if you've ever tried to see the real place as a tourist, you know the struggles. It's still very real. I spent 3 weeks, several decades ago now, I feel so old, in England. And I loved that I had 3 weeks because even though I was still a tourist, I was staying with a friend's family for a little while of that 3 weeks. And then I was a Boy Scout leader, so I was able to tap into the Baden-Powell House as a place that I could stay at. It was, I don't know if it's still there, but it was a hostel that was only available for people who were scouts or scout leaders. So I was still a registered scout leader and I was able to stay there. It was great. That's in Kensington. So I think a block away from Kensington Gardens. It was a great location. And, you know, a great opportunity that if it's still there, if they still are available for people in the scouting community, totally take advantage of that if you can. Because yeah, it was fantastic. But, you know, without those kinds of amenities, you're stuck with a hotel and the kind of information that you get from people that know that you're there as a tourist. So I was able to travel around and go to restaurants that my friend's family loved, without having to try and guess from the look of the building outside which one's the good ones. So I had some amazing Indian food. We had Lebanese food from a restaurant near one of the cathedrals. And, you know, traveled around and just had a great time. But most of what we did was not on the tourist itinerary. And so I definitely could relate to this lady and her experiences trying to see the real Taiwan, and wanting to try real Taiwanese food, because it just wasn't something they thought that a Japanese tourist wants to eat. Some of it sounded really gross, but some of it she really liked and appreciated being able to try. Um, so anyway, it was a really good book, and it gets into a lot of issues of colonization and kind of the psychology of being colonized and colonizing someone, and what that looks like even when you're not trying to be patronizing or limiting to colony members or to the colony as a whole. So it's a really great book. And because it's set back in time and in a place that most of its readers, in the English translation anyway, are not from, you can think about these issues without it being tied into a current issue that you're emotionally invested in. So it's like reading a fantasy novel. There's more room for actually feeling and thinking things about this situation without it feeling threatening to you with something that you're personally involved in. Even if you're from Taiwan, it's no longer the 1930s. So it's a great book. I can definitely see why it made the shortlist. International Booker shortlist came out today, and it is on the shortlist. So yay! I've read one. I still have not gotten any of the other books on the shortlist. So at least it made it. So I'm 1 down, 5 to go on that shortlist. Yay! All right. Next up, we have a nonfiction that reads like a crazy novel. This book, I looked at it, every time I was browsing through the things that are available for streaming audio for our library. Our library does this thing on Hoopla. I don't know how many libraries are signed up to do it or any of the price tiers or anything for why we have it. But in our library's Hoopla subscription, we have 10 checkouts per month that are just straight up, streaming audio or ebook, and then 10 flex checkouts. So the first 10, you only get that many for the entire month. The second 10, the flex checkouts, you get 10 total. So if you read the book, turn it back in, now you can get another one, and it doesn't matter what month it is. It's just 10 total, period. And there's only certain books that are available in that flex listing. So it's usually more recent books or books that they're pushing for some reason. Solito by Javier Zamora is one of the ones that's been available in the flex section for a while. And I kept looking at it, and I'd seen a few people talking about it, but I wasn't sure how heavy it was going to be, if I was going to be emotionally ready to deal with it. I'm in the United States, in a part of the United States that was basically along the US-Mexico border until the 1840s. We have a lot of families here that they're not immigrants. They have family, especially extended family, that is in Mexico, and the border showed up after their families were no longer all living in the same place. So it's not quite to the extent that you see in parts of Europe or colonized areas in general, Middle East, Africa. There's a lot of areas where the border just pops up and divides families. We're not quite to that extent, only because where I'm at, pre-irrigation technology, the carrying capacity of our area was not very high. There weren't a lot of cities. Well, there weren't cities, there were villages, and they weren't very big. And most of the population growth came with mining, silver mining in particular. So it's not like there were huge communities, but there were still families that were here and that have grown. And yeah. So anyway, for the purposes of Solito, it is a little more regionally relevant because we have a lot of immigration that makes the whole current immigration mess particularly of interest. So I wasn't really sure what I'd think about this book. Uh, I try to take some care of my psychology. But this one's actually really good. It's also one of those stories. It's a true story. It's a memoir. It's not fiction. It's about a man that in this book is a boy, 9 years old, traveling by himself to the border and then across the border with a coyote and his group of people he's shepherding. And he, tries the first time, they get detained and removed back to Mexico. I think he's from, is it El Salvador? I think it was El Salvador. So he's not actually from Mexico, and they travel to Mexico to be able to make this crossing. And so, he gets deported back to Mexico and has to try again. And this time, all the money that had been paid out the first round is gone. And so now they have to figure out how to pay for yet another route. And the family kind of knew that this might be a thing, but think about this. This is a 9-year-old kid who's basically by himself in Mexico. I think his grandfather showed up at that point, but he's still, he's doing things that most 9-year-old children would not be expected to do. So, and amazing. He's not the only immigrant, obviously, that's had this experience. There are a lot of unaccompanied minors that are detained right now. There's that children's facility. Some of those children were separated from their parents in the U.S. Others of those children were detained traveling on their own. So yeah, there's a lot of people for whom this story is very relatable. And it's been going on for a long time. In this case, his parents were already here. So he was traveling to join his parents in the United States. And I don't know what their immigration status is. I certainly don't know if this family is still in the U.S. now. With the way things are going and how public this book is, I have to wonder. But it's a really, really good picture of who these people are that get caught up in the politics that's going on right now. And that's been going on, periodically throughout U.S. history. Most countries, not just most Western countries, most countries deal with what do you do with people that come from other countries and just show up. And a lot of countries are not very nice to the people that show up from other places. Ours is not the only country that's having issues with being humane to people coming from other places. So it's hugely relevant to everywhere. And it doesn't have a tragic ending, which is good. I'm going to tell you that right now. It may be slightly a spoiler, except that it's the guy writing his memoir, so obviously he didn't die. So, not much of a spoiler, but it doesn't have a bad ending. This one hit so well because I wasn't expecting it. Sometimes that's definitely a thing. So we'll see if this one lasts to stay in the top 10 by the end of the year. I am aiming for 400 books this year. 400 or 450, I don't remember. But certainly more. Was I crazy enough to say 500 on Storygraph? I don't know. I might have. I was 25 books short of 500 last year. So maybe it's 500. I don't know if that's going to happen this year. Anyway, tangents aside, back to the book. So, yeah, so I don't know if it's going to stick in the top 10 by the end of the year. But it was really good. This book, To America by Stephen E. Ambrose, is kind of a memoir about Ambrose's career as a history writer and a historian. So it's him growing up, coming of age, becoming a young man in the United States, and developing his interest and his skills in history, and all the stuff that influenced like how he landed on different topics when he started writing books, and it was just really interesting. And at the same time, it also kind of dips a toe into all the topics that were some of his, more acclaimed books. Ambrose has written a lot of really good history books. And I have several here. There will be some that I'll be reading this year that are on my 26 and 26 nonfiction list, and others that I have that I will also be reading maybe this year. We'll see if I have time to read all of my Ambrose books or not. But I'm a lot more inclined to tackle some of his other books, having read this one, because of the way he introduced those topics and why he wrote about those things in the first place, and what motivated him to focus on certain things and not others in those books. I found it really interesting, and I learned a lot about some of the stuff that doesn't make it into the mainstream narratives about those stories. So this is also one of Ambrose's shorter books. If you like, historians talking about being a historian, um, you know, really, really smart people who know lots of history just talking about kind of their life in the United States and their perspective on things that have happened, this is a great book. I did not expect to like it. At the time, I was still running the history section in a Friends of the Library used bookstore, and I just wanted to see if this was worth stocking in multiples, because we had plenty of copies and it wasn't getting any traction. It would just sit on the shelf and no one would buy it. Like, well, maybe people know something about it that I don't. Turns out it's really good. And I don't think they had any extra copies by the time I left, because I told people that it's actually really good. So now it's being read by other people, and maybe it won't have that problem for a while, because those people tell their friends, and pretty soon any new copies that show up at that bookstore will get bought. So yay. All right, next up we have a fantasy. This is another one I got as a streaming audio from the Flex category at our library. And it's kind of a low risk way to try some of these fantasy books that may or may not be any good. I know I've seen a lot of videos talking about the diminishing quality of kind of fast fiction fantasy, and this cover certainly borrows some of the aesthetic of those covers. And I think right now it's a smart marketing move to try and look like some of the other fantasy that's selling well. But I kind of wonder how long that bubble is going to last, because a lot of books seem to be banking on a trend while not keeping up a quality that's going to maintain that trend. So I wonder if this book is one that, if it gets a new edition, will get a redesign of the cover to step away from that aesthetic a little bit. And it has the clock. It could go, towards more of a clocky, clocky art sort of fantasy theme, and still be well within the story, or even something more creepy. So this book is set kind of in a dimension outside of the world we live in, outside time and space, which is cool. Like a bubble universe sort of thing that some people can step into, that involves watches. The magic system is not well defined. That's sort of just something you accept. This is just, it works. We don't know how it works. That's kind of one of the problems. We don't know how it works. So we don't know what the parameters are. If we try this, are we going to die? That kind of thing. But the main characters are connected in with the Holocaust era, World War II, and bad things are happening. And some of the characters are connected with the being Jewish side of that experience, and some are not. But basically, the Nazis and their prey are showing up in this other world. Like, that conflict is bleeding into this bubble universe. And it's making things scary. So it's magical realism, partially historical fiction. It does get into World War II. You will learn a few tidbits that you might not have known already. And it does seem to be pretty well researched. It is consistent with what I know for that era. But it is very much fantasy. It's not trying to teach you history. And it was fun. So I definitely recommend it. I do hope that they are considering other covers, because I would have passed it up if I'd been reading other cheap fantasy and then picked this one up. And not to diss all fantasy that has this style of cover. Just, there are a lot of people that are more wary when a book looks like this kind of curly Q font, obvious just fantasy cover. Some of them are badly edited. Some of them, there's not much plot, and they're tapping into the romantasy trend. So they throw in some spice and hope that makes up for not having much of a plot, or the characters just being generic, or yeah. So we'll see if a year from now that's still a trend that's ongoing. Because I wonder, like, how long does it take for a book trend like that to crumble? Eventually, people stop buying the books. The subscription services no longer have people wanting them because they can't be sure the books they're getting are actually something they want to read. So I will be watching that. I don't really like romantasy as a rule. Spice, being ace, and wanting fantasy that doesn't have too much gratuitous spice. It's kind of the wrong direction for me as a reader. For me as a bookseller, I'm just curious, because I will obviously be selling to people that are not ace as I get my bookstore spun up. So anyway, other aside, moving back to the books. All right, next up is the other East Asian book out of this group. This one's set in China. It's called The Vagrants by Yiyun Li. It is set in communist China and is centered around two young people, a young girl and a slightly older young man, who are just trying to survive and get by in a society that's really kind of stacked against them in all sorts of ways. And there's a lot going on in this book. If you haven't read books set in Maoist or post-Mao communist China, there may be some things that you'll want to look up on Wikipedia just to confirm that, that does happen. This is actually real, and I confirm this is how it works. this is a really well told story, just in general, that will give you a sense of what it's like for people, for some people anyway, in China, in this particular part of China. And this is one that I'm not sure will still be in the top 10 after another 300 books. It was good, but you can tell my recall for this book, like, I remember it, I remember liking it, I remember scenes, but it didn't resonate with me in such a way that I'm gonna remember this particular book in 10 years. I'll remember things about it, but it's not the first book I've read in this setting or about this kind of characters. It just was really good. It definitely made the top 10 in this cut, but I will be reading for a lot of prize lists this year, and there are a lot of amazing books that are still to come out, as well as all the ones that have already come out that are stacked up around me that you can't see because right where the camera is, it's not overwhelmed by book stacks. But yeah, so this one may not be in the top 10 by the end of the year, but it's still in the top 100 for sure. It was really good. All right, next up, we have a German novel in translation, Girl 1983 by Linn Ullmann. This is about a young woman who has experienced some sort of sexual trauma that she doesn't really remember. And she is seeking closure, justice, but also just trying to get her life on track, while dealing with these partially remembered bits about what happened to her as a girl. And the people involved with her life when she was a teenager don't really want her to remember what actually happened. So it's very timely for the whole Epstein files thing that's going on right now, where we have all these survivors of the Epstein mess, that they were children, they were teenagers and preteens when they were drawn into that stuff. And they may not have perfect recall of all of the more traumatic parts of what happened to them in the hands of the older men involved in this stuff. So yeah, so it's a really relevant topic right now. And I just liked how this book deals with memory, trauma, recovery, what that kind of trauma does to you, whether you remember it or not. And then what do you do about it? Because ideally, all of the predators involved in these kinds of scandals and crimes will be dealt with by the law and will suffer consequences and deter the next batch of would-be predators on young girls, because they'll see that, whether they want to do those things with those children or not, they're not allowed to, and they're going to get in trouble. Realistically, we do know better. We know that the majority of girls who are molested, their molesters don't see consequences. So, what do you do about that? And this book does get into that question of, so whether you're going to get justice or not, now what? If you remember what happened to you, okay, now you can deal with the trauma, but your life continues on from this point going forward. How do you get over it and move on, knowing that you may get justice and that just may not happen because the world sucks in these cases. And so it's a mixed ending. Yeah, it's not like all the bad guys just get arrested and thrown in jail and everybody lives happily ever after. Even after justice is served in these cases, it doesn't mean that the trauma goes away. It just means that the bad guys got dealt with. It doesn't mean that you don't have to solve that question of what do you do for the rest of your life now that these things have happened to you. And yeah, so it's very relevant, very well done. I'm surprised that more literary fiction readers haven't been talking about this one, because it's of a caliber that it should be on more people's radars. Maybe it's not everybody's cup of tea, and maybe it's just not a theme that everybody wants on their prize lists this year. I don't know. I have no idea what it looks like on that end, like how they narrow down what books they're looking at. I know that in a lot of cases, it's the publisher sending the books in as nominees. So maybe this publisher just isn't sending the book in. I don't know. But it's definitely in that caliber where you read it and you're like, this book should be on prize lists. So read it. It was really good. I had some really good 5 stars this month, in the month of March, since this is 31st of March at the moment. This one I didn't know about at all before I started it. I didn't read the back of the book. I had no idea when we were set or where we were set until I started reading. This book is set in like 800 something in England. It's during an era of English history where enclosure was a big social issue. So these people in these villages have been living there and just kind of doing their thing. Land ownership was something on paper, and lived reality is that they're doing what their grandfathers did, and they're just surviving and building houses and living in them and growing crops and selling them. And maybe there's a landowner and you have to give them some of your crops. But there's not really a lot of flex going on the part of landowners, to use a very modern term, about the fact that they own the land. And then all of a sudden, the landowners start putting up fences, enclosing land, changing the things they're going to do with the land, and upending people's livelihoods just because they can. So in this one, the landowner has decided that he wants to start doing textiles. So he is going to enclose the land, grow sheep, and they're going to spin wool instead of whatever it is that they've been growing so far. And it does not matter that the people living there, their livelihoods depend on the stuff they've been growing, that they know how to grow. So harvest opens with a fire. And some of these villagers are pushing back, but it's not clear who. So not only is there this enclosure thing going on, there's also a justice thing going on where the landowner is claiming the right to determine like legal justice and punishment for people that are breaking the law, as in burning property that belongs to the landowner. And so now we really are seeing a flex from the landowners that are claiming rights over the people in this village. And the crackdown really shows the villagers where their place is supposed to be according to the people in charge, with interesting consequences. I liked the ending of this book. It was fun. And it's a time period that I don't read a lot of books in, but it felt so modern. It's a historical era that's come and gone at this point. All the fences are there. All the estates in England have been not only fenced, they've been sold and built up in housing complexes and all sorts of stuff. So the landscape is not what it once was. Anyway, so it feels modern, but these issues have come and gone and they're settled. But there are other areas where this stuff is going on still. More recently, the Saving the Fire book by Itamar Vieira Jr. From Brazil. That one deals with a village in the rainforest where that family has been there and their village has been there for generations, and now the church is flexing as a landowner that believes they own the land and actually selling off the land to the new flavor of landowner, the big business people that may not even be located anywhere local. They own the land and they have some manager that they pay to deal with it, and they don't have any connection to the land. So this kind of enclosure and landlord flexing and power dynamics, this is still going on in other parts of the world, even if England went through a lot of this, well over 1,000 years ago. I'm not doing math today. So anyway, really good book. And I have another book by Jim Crace that I will be reading. So this one will probably be on my April TBR because I liked Harvest well enough that I need to read more Jim Crace. This one will be Quarantine. And it was a Booker finalist. So yay, another book that I get to check off for a list. All right, next up is another one that I finished in March. This one is one that I got it as an ARC, and then I got it from the Friends of the Library bookstore as a book that the cover was coming off, and so they weren't going to sell it, so I got to take it home. And then I also found it as an audiobook through the library. So I definitely explored all of the variations in formatting with this book. It meant that I could read it on my screen, and I could read it when I was out, and I could listen to it while I was doing dishes. So it took a remarkably short amount of time because I didn't have to put it down at all while I was reading it, which is good because it was a really good book. When the Cranes Fly South by Lisa Ridzen, this book is about a man who is getting old, and he has a dog that he loves, and it's his best friend, his only companion most of the time. He also has a friend who's also getting old, and that he does talk with them on the phone a lot, and they see each other. But his life is really contracted to just the dog and his one friend and his kids. His daughter is not near enough for him to see her very often. And his son is the kid that gets to deal with all the issues with his father not being able to dress himself and take care of himself very well. He has home help. So he does have people that show up on shifts, and this is in Europe, so they actually can afford to have home help that has shifts, and so he's not alone ever. So yeah, I'm actually living in a situation where I'm like exchanging being an available person living in the house when things need to be done for rent. So it's like a home help thing, but I'm not doing healthcare. I'm here house sitting at short notice, pet sitting at short notice kind of thing. But the reason that the family that I'm living with can't have this kind of round-the-clock care for their aging family member is because in the US, this kind of round-the-clock care is prohibitively expensive, and insurance won't pay for it, especially if you have to tap into Medicare and Medicaid at some point to help pay for that. And that's one of the things that in Europe, this did not come across in this novel as if this was something unusual. So very timely in that respect. I'm sure it's not the point of the story for the author, but for a reader in the US reading this, that's one of the things that stuck out is, wow, this guy, he's not rolling in money, and he's got 24/7 home health care and just personal assistance. Yeah, that was an incredible detail in this book. Like, I would love to be that lucky when I get that old, to be able to know that I'll have someone to help me into the shower and to help me get dressed when I'm old enough that I can't physically do it myself. Anyway, he's at that stage. He has some memory issues, but they could be a lot worse. He's not, late stage dementia or anything like that. But he's just declining. He's obviously in his last decade, probably in his last year. But he could have several years. It's not obvious at the beginning of the book how long he has, but it is obvious that he's not able to take care of his dog very well. The home care people are having to take care of the dog, which they're not paid to do. That's not one of their duties officially. They do it anyway, and some of them like the dog, but it makes it harder to find people to place in those jobs because they don't all want to be responsible for walking the dog and taking care of the dog and clipping its nails and all that kind of stuff. So it's become enough of an issue that the son decides that the dog needs to go and starts looking for a family that will take the dog. And this is his father's only friend and companion for most of his remaining time on Earth. And so we're seeing from the perspective of the son, from the perspective of the care workers, and from this perspective of the old man. And I love the storytelling. You really get a nuanced understanding of the dilemmas going on in this story. And it's a very different scale of story from some of the other ones on my list because it is so quiet and personal. It's just an old man who doesn't have long to live, and he's got a dog, and he's got a friend. And by the end of the book, maybe he doesn't have anything left because he doesn't have that much time left. And so end of life story, and lots of stuff to think about. I'm hoping that I have a few decades before the old man's part of this story is something that's super relevant for me. But it does make you think about, what will it be like when I get that old? And, who do I have that's going to be around to help me when I get that old? And what does that look like? And in my country, what are the options if I was that old right now? What does that even look like? So, even with all of the support services he can access, it's still not great. So then imagining what it's like if you can't have all those home services, if you have to be in a care home where there's 5 people taking care of way too many patients that all need this kind of care around the clock. And it makes it easier to empathize with what it's like for people that are in that stage of their life, and also what it's like to be the kids, which is more where I'm likely to relate in the more near future, because I'm more in the age group of his son. I think he's actually within like a year or two of my age. So that would be my generation in this story. But it really gets you into all of the different perspectives. You get the care notes from each of the home helpers, because they leave notes as they end their shift and that kind of stuff. So it was really good. I was not expecting this one to be about this topic, although it does have a guy and a dog on the cover. I didn't really know what it was about going into it. I managed to not know despite having it in 3 formats. So, yay, that was good. And this is another one that I would not be at all surprised if it's on short lists and long lists for things. It was just that good. It was just a complete package, an excellent story about something that all of us are going to be able to relate to at some point. So great book. Check it out. It's really good. All right. Last but not least, we're at book 10. They're not in any particular order. So right now it's just these are the top 10 at all. And they'll get ranked by the end of the year, I'm sure. But for now, this one's the 10th one. This one, Air by Christian Kracht, translated from the German, I believe. Pretty sure it was translated from German. Might have been Norwegian. But translated into English, it is an arc. I don't remember when it comes out or came out, but it's definitely one that is a 2026 release. I was not behind reading this one, which is unusual. This is one that I got approved for, and it was short. And when I opened it up just to check it out, when I got approved for it on NetGalley, I was like, oh, this is really short. And I read the first 2 pages, like, I'm already hooked. I'm going to read this one. So in a rare Jamie move, I read this one within the week that I got it on NetGalley because it was just that good. It drew me in right away. And it's important to add in the element of I really liked the 2-season series of Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency. The one that went two seasons, because there's an earlier one that only made it through 1 season and was totally different. The 2-season version, it kind of is inspired by the Dirk Gently books, by Douglas Adams, but it's inspired by them and went off in a totally different direction. And the vibes, especially from the 2nd season, where we're getting into visions that may be the reality or like different levels of reality or dimensions in reality kind of thing, and like fantasy that may not be just a dream, but maybe it is just a dream, or who knows what's really going on. And it has those vibes. If this was the inspiration for a season 3, this could very easily be like, how to extend a season 3 of Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency to keep going in that direction. Except that then you might as well just do a movie for Air and not need to tag it on to that season or series. So maybe it's not necessary, but it fits the vibes well enough that it could dovetail seamlessly. So in this book, we start out, we're in kind of 2 parallel stories. In one, we're in the world that we know, it's, business people and business travel and just ordinary people. And then in the other, we are in the perspective of a girl who is, I guess, a child. But her age is kind of hard to define. early on in this part of the story, and she's just living in a house, a cabin sort of house. She knows a lot of things about plants and their uses as remedies, and she's really good with a bow and arrow, and she's out hunting and thinks that she has shot a beast. And when she gets closer, she finds that she has shot a man. And being a responsible little girl, she decides that she can't just leave him out there. She has to bring him home and patch him up. So she does. And at that point, it's still not clear why this is in the same book. And the way these two worlds are connected is so cool. Yeah. So this is a really fun book. If you're not into magical realism and kind of mind-bending storytelling, you might find this a little bit frustrating. I know friends that this is just not going to be their book. They're not into this type of storytelling, and what the fuck was that is going to come out of their mouths a lot while reading this book. But if you like magical realism and those kind of parallel world sort of things, and dreams that may or may not be dreams, think like Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass, this is a really cool book. All right, so I poked at Storygraph, and this book came out in German initially, was translated into Swedish and Norwegian. And those editions came out in 2025, so last year. And then it was translated and came out in English this year. Not sure if it has the same publication dates for US and the UK, but I will put it in the description what the publication date is for this one, and anything else that was an arc that the publication date is not already passed, or vice versa. We'll just, anything I read as an arc, might as well put the publication date in, because some of those, it takes a while for them to filter into bookstores and libraries, as I always find out the hard way when I'm trying to read long lists. I don't know about this one being on prize lists. It's certainly good enough. I was very enthusiastic about it, so obviously other people might be too. I'm just not sure which prize it would work for. Maybe the Booker. It depends on what other contenders there are, whether this is something that would make it into the long list for the Booker. But it was really good. And we do have a translated literature prize for National Book Award, I think, as well. So it could work for that. But it is definitely of that caliber. It was really fun. All right, so there you have it. There are my 10 top books so far in 2026, now that I've read 100 so far this year. I will do this again. When I get to 200, I will do another top 10 just from the next 100 books that I read. So then I'll have, by the end of the year, 4 or 5 sets of 10 that I can winnow down into a top books of the year. And it may be a top 20, because it seems unfair to cut it down from 40 or 50 books to just 10. It's just too many books to justify that kind of elimination all in one go. Maybe I'll do a halfway point where halfway through the year I'll cut my top books in half, and then see what I get for the last half of the year. I haven't really decided yet. When you read books at this volume, some of the things that work for people with normal sized reading lists get a little unwieldy. And there aren't as many people, even in the booktube space, that read at the scale that I do. So I've learned a few tips and tricks from other readers that are on my scale. There are a couple that steadily beat me in numbers. They just they're at 500 easy, while I'm still struggling to get to 300. So I'm not the top of the pack, but I will readily admit that not everybody has the time or the inclination to read at this volume. So think of me as a bookseller for whom this is, this is my life. I live and breathe the books. And when I have my bookstore, I will be a bookseller, actually, officially. So don't feel like you have to finish 100 books in the first 3 months of the year. That's just something that you could do if you had my lifestyle and wanted to. It's totally possible. If you guys want videos about how I read this many books, I certainly can do more content like that. I did one in the past that was pre modern skills. And I will probably start doing some more kind of essay-ish content now that I've figured out a few more tricks. And certainly as I learn more tricks, I'll make updated videos on stuff like that. But there are already videos out there about tips and tricks for reading more books. And I hate, flogging that topic beyond what people need. If you made it this far, obviously you liked the video enough to still be here. So click a like if you haven't already done that. And hit subscribe if you're not already subscribed, because there's more where this comes from. I read this volume of books all the time. So I have plenty of books to talk about. I am brushing up my skills and getting new ones constantly. So my videos are hopefully getting better as I learn more of what works on my poor sad old Chromebook. And yeah, so this is probably what you'll get more of going forward, as well as some of the other content that you'll see on my channel that's really just me talking at the camera. If you like podcasts that just keep you company and you just listen in the background, I do a lot of that kind of stuff for wrap-ups. So that is definitely something I can pretty much promise is going to be coming again. As a matter of fact, it's the 31st. I need to do a March wrap-up. So and there will be some topical videos. There's one that I just posted yesterday, recently, that is focusing in on just 3 books about creepy houses. And the covers happen to be kind of spring and green and cozy. So if you like little mini theme videos, that's something that I'll be doing more of, to introduce people to books that are basically, if you like this one, you might like these other books, kind of format. And I'm still coming up with more content. Once I have my bookstore, I will be making content that is aimed at introducing people to more books, because that's why I want my bookstore, is to introduce more people to the books they're going to love. So in the meantime, happy reading, everyone. Welcome to the channel if you have subscribed and this is your first time meeting me, and I look forward to seeing all of you in the next video. Bye!